Good afternoon. So we're going to have a discussion in English about regulation right after lunch. Those of you who want to take a nap, you can do so now. Donc, mon nom est Thérèse Toris. My name is Thérèse Toris, and I also write for Crowdfund Insider, the largest blog on crowdfunding. I will introduce our panelists. To my left, you have first Jennifer Long. Jennifer Long is a financial services regulator. She's working on financial innovation at ESMA, the European Securities and Markets Authority. She has previously worked in the UK at the UK Financial Services Authority, the FCA, at the European Commission and at the European Parliament on developing and implementing regulations at national and European level. And in particular, at ESMA, she has prepared the opinion and advice on investment-based crowdfunding, which she will be discussing with us in a moment. Next, we have Vincent Ricordo. Vincent is the CEO of KissKissBankBank Technologies. He is a crowdfunding entrepreneur and a very rare example of serial entrepreneur with the same two co-founders, isn't it? So in 2009, the trio co-founded rewards-based crowdfunding platform KissKissBankBank. And then in 2013, interest-free P2P lending platform Hello Merci. And most recently, the crowd lending platform Lendopolis. And together, these three platforms have raised more than 50 million euros, 53 million euros, and financed more than 20,000 creative and entrepreneurial projects from 6 countries. So that's why he's here to talk to us about Europe. And then, last but not least, we have Oliver. Oliver is really the expert in crowdfunding, international crowdfunding and crowdfunding regulation. Oliver is a strategic consultant, public affairs advisor and mentor in alternative finance. In 2011, he co-founded the European Crowdfunding Network, of which Financement Participatif France is a member. And this association gathers around 60 crowdfunding companies and their advisors. And its aim is, like the aim of FPF at a French level, to issue guidelines for good governance, to promote crowdfunding and represent the sector at European level in particular. So our topic is Europe versus European countries. I don't know if this topic speaks to you, so I'm going to explain it because it may be a bit mysterious. What this topic refers to is regulation. There is a huge tension, one could say, between regulation at European level, in particular the regulation of the Financial Instruments Directive, the MiFID directive, and regulation, local regulation of crowdfunding. What happened is that, on the one hand, the European Union has been working for decades, one could say, very hard towards creating convergence and harmonization of national financial services regulations, most recently through the Capital Markets Union. But on the other hand, national authorities, like the French IMF, have responded to local demands by small businesses and by the crowdfunding platforms who needed to be regulated in order to create trust in their markets. As Emmanuel Macron said this morning, there was a need to accompany the movement, the crowdfunding movement. The result is that most European countries have issued a very local, very specific ad hoc crowdfunding regulation that have deviated from the European framework. And they are therefore divergent. as a result, we now have a hodgepodge of national regulation. And the question that we're going to ask today is whether this very diverse mix of regulation is helping the European market, is helping, in particular, crowdfunding platforms to grow at European level. So I will hand over to Jennifer. The first question is, platforms and regulators felt that it was justified to innovate in crowdfunding outside of the Markets in Financial Instruments Directive, the MiFID regulation. They felt that there was too much uncertainty about the applicable European law, that the capital requirements were way too high for startups, that it was way too complex and a lengthy process to be authorized, for example, as a PSI, and that the requirements were basically non-proportionate and inadequate. In the famous opinion I was referring to, you have countered those arguments. Can you present the point of view of ESMA?
Absolutely. And I think maybe just to start with, I'm not so sure that it's as fierce a difference between action at European and at national level as Therese's introduction might have led us to think. I think what we found when we in ESMA started looking at what was happening in the regulatory regime was that we found that there were lots of people around Europe trying to answer the same question at the same time, really, and thinking about the best way to deal with these new businesses. And lots of people, I think, were scratching their heads and asking questions and thinking, how do we make regulation work for these business models? And often with entrepreneurs starting new businesses who may not have been in the financial sector before, to whom the existing regulation wasn't so familiar as it is to some of those who've been in the market for years. So I think what we found was quite a lot of learning all round. And I think there was a degree of uncertainty about how the European framework in particular applied, how much of what was there did actually relate to crowdfunding as people wanted to run their businesses. And I think a lot of the questions that arose, I think people also had the same questions when they were looking at whether their existing national regimes actually did or did not accommodate crowdfunding business. So I think we had that period where everybody was quite uncertain. And what we tried to do at the European level, working with our national authorities, was at least to clarify where the existing European rules, which of course hadn't been developed specifically with crowdfunding in mind. So where they did and where they didn't fit this business. And I think that we saw challenges for everybody in the early stages of doing that. You mentioned, Therese, the issues about the authorizations process. I'm not sure anybody that's been through authorization by a financial regulator thought it was perhaps the most enjoyable experience of their lives. But certainly it's true, and not just in crowdfunding, that when you're trying to do something new, regulators will typically have more questions about that. And I think that's true whether you're operating under a European or a national regime. What we tried to do at ESMA was to clarify, therefore, how the existing European rules do and don't apply to different business models of crowdfunding. And it was clear that regulators were trying to do this. They were experiencing some difficulty because there are lots of different structures being used. Obviously, there's a lot of experimentation in the sector. So we were trying really just to help them navigate this existing regulatory regime. As you said, Therese, it was clear that some member states were thinking that there may be more that they could do, either around the edge or within some of the discretion that's provided by MiFID in order to tailor the regime to make it more flexible for startup businesses. And we work with all of those authorities. And I think clearly a lot of the things that those national regimes have tried to do, we can see the purpose of them. So often they're about trying to make sure that investors really are protected for the sort of business that you're doing, and we deal particularly with investment-based crowdfunding. They're trying to make sure that the way in which you're regulated it works for a small business, for a new business. Our concern, and this is where we get to the difficulty that we identified, our concern was that if you only look at this at a national level, we wonder whether we will enable the crowdfunding business model to reach its full potential. And that's where we have a worry about really over-relying on action only at national level. Because as we see the business models, most of the business models, though they may differ in terms of their structures, you need to keep having new rounds of capital raising. You'll benefit from an economy of scale. We just heard a pitch, somebody talking about that, operating across different markets. And we think there's a big potential here for crowdfunding to bring benefits both to investors and also to businesses that need finance. But if a platform has to work out each of the different local regimes in order to operate across Europe, that imposes cost. It also imposes just uncertainty as you try to work out what the different requirements are that you face. And that was really, I think, the big concern that we had when we came to look at this.
You argued also that a number of concerns were, in fact, due to misunderstanding. Can you clarify that?
I think and you particularly mentioned the Markets in Financial Instruments Directive, so maybe to give an example from there. I think, and this is not something that was specifically a phenomenon about what we heard in the French marketplace, just to be clear about that. But in order to be authorised as a MiFID firm, there are capital requirements that apply, and in some cases they can be very high. They can be 730,000 euros, but for the typical crowdfunding platform, they would be nothing like that. And member states do also have the discretion to allow firms doing a restricted range of activities not to have capital requirements, but instead to have professional indemnity insurance to provide the protection that's needed for investors. So effectively, there are already some freedoms that are given to member states by the European legislation that mean that it's not necessarily the worst case that you might hear if you're talking about how some firms might be regulated under this European legislation.
Oliver, I think on this issue you might disagree. You might think that it was not a misunderstanding, but real difficulties.
I would never disagree with Jennifer. Thank you for inviting us. So, no, I mean, I think Jennifer has already outlined the situation probably quite clearly. If you look at it from a regulator's point of view, there is existing financial markets regulation, be it MiFID, be it other things, all addressing, of course, until now existing financial markets, formal, informal. When crowdfunding happened, or especially financial services crowdfunding, the first platforms that started out did not seek this type of regulation. They tried to operate below the European regulation framework. So within national loopholes that existed everywhere. And they were able to grow quite well, but not really big. So, and then the point where platforms start to become noticed by the regulator, or where they want to grow beyond what they have achieved, so maybe they want to go across border and seek approval. The keyword that Jennifer mentioned is that there are freedoms in EU law, but they are up to the national regulators' interpretation. And it basically depends in which country you live, if you can do it or not. And because crowdfunding was very new, and the regulators 3 years ago didn't know what crowdfunding was, and even today some have real problems understanding what it is, you will not get the lowest value with a capital requirement. They will look at it and say it's very risky. And so you may have a regulator that says, no, I'm sorry, you have to have the highest capital requirement rule that we have, because we just don't understand what it is. And so we have seen discussions on national level on how to deal with regulation for crowdfunding under European laws. Here in France, it's exemplary. This is the most democratic country in Europe right now when it comes to this discussion. Where in the Ministry of Finance, a discussion like this doesn't happen anywhere else in Europe. Nowhere else. In Germany, it's all behind closed doors. There's nothing transparent about it. So you have different countries dealing differently with it and looking at the issues and gathering information in different ways. and then finding in a democratic, way with other stakeholders' input, some solution that is below the European level, that is therefore not applicable to the neighboring country, like the regimes in France, you can't passport them, that work internally. And so you have now 7 EU countries that have regulated crowdfunding. This is what you mentioned. So they actually regulated something that wasn't so far regulated within EU legislation with a very specific national framework, which is no longer compatible and will never be compatible. Again, if you look at the British, the French, and the German, it will take years of negotiation to find alignment between these regimes.
As not everybody is familiar with the differences, maybe you can mention a few. For example, the upper limit on equity crowdfunding, this type of the suitability of the investor, the type of instruments.
Yeah, this is all going to change this year, hopefully with the prospectus directive, but right now the EU threshold is 5 million euros for equity issues. So up to 5 million euros you can issue equity without a prospectus, right? But there's a minimum threshold of 100,000 euros below which the national regulator has no freedom to change the rules. And between 100,000 and 500,000 it is up to the national regulator to impose an adequate measure. So some countries, like in Germany or Austria, there's no discussion, it's 100,000 euros, it's the lowest risk we can pass on. In other countries that are more, finance orientated, like the UK, like the Netherlands, like some of the Baltic countries, it's higher. So in the UK, it's 5 million euros.
And
so
in Italy, it's 2.5.
In
and
Italy,
in
it's
France,
2.5.
we heard this morning that the limit will be raised from 1 million to 2.5 million.
But this is only one difference. So there's so many other differences. The difference in France now, if you're an equity platform, you become an advisor and therefore you carry liability. In the UK, you're a broker-dealer, you have no liability. In Germany, you can choose. Nobody is an advisor. Yeah? But if you're not an advisor, you have to stick to a very specific subordinated debt structure, which the German regulator says is not equity. So they consider this debt financing. So you end up in a very niche pocket in which you can operate and expand, but you develop a business model and a network of investors and a whole structure of your business focused on this specific solution. And so you would have real problems operating in the same way in the Netherlands, for example. And we know Dutch platforms that try to operate in Germany and they find it incredibly difficult and very costly. And I think Vincent can maybe say something as well, even though you do more lending and reward, but I'm sure there's many similarities.
Yeah, Vincent, would you have started in a different model? Would you have started so many platforms if you had to go through European regulation?
If you look at it really deeply, we need to give a definition of what crowdfunding is or not to start with, because as you all know in the audience, you've got 3 different types of crowdfunding. The reward-based system, and by luck for us, it's out of the discussion of today. I mean, we don't have so much threats on the reward base. So when we start KissKissBankBank at that time, 2009, although at that time we didn't have any specific things, national or international, but what we did 10 or 8 years later, I mean, we keep on going quite easily with this kind of platforms. I mean, so to make sure that everybody understands when we're talking about regulation, we are talking about loans and equity. We're not talking about reward-based, of course. So, I mean, our life was quite easy at the beginning, although after 1 or 2 years of existence, we had a phone call of la ACPR, who called us and told us, okay, now above 1 million, we need to talk with you, we need to understand what you do, how you do it, how it works. And everybody told us at that time that it's going to be a nightmare to work with these guys and they will try to, to punch us and to kill us. It was not the case, really. I mean, they little by little understood what we did. And at the end of the day, after these long talks with governments and all the teams from Fleur Pellerin at the beginning and Macron, we all said that the reward base might stay out of problems or legislation or regulatory environment, which is of course a good case, which is mean that for us with KissKissBankBank, you can passport KissKissBankBank whatever you want in every country of Europe or worldwide, where today we have projects from 40 countries and KISS bankers from 178 countries. I mean, for the reward-based, if you want to launch a reward-based platform, I mean, you can be free in your mind for that. You'll not be bothered by all those discussions. When it comes to loans, why did we start by loans instead of equity? I mean, this answer is what we're talking about right now, because for us, especially for people which are not coming from finance environment, I mean, all those threats, all those ideas, all those things that we had to respect was ununderstandable for us. It was too much. I mean, it was like, compared to what the easy life we had with KISS Bank, it was impossible for us to transport what we did in the reward-based in the equity system. The business model is really, really tight, and all those trends behind seems to us really, really complicated. And then when you start to think about the lending system, then the lending system, I mean, quite easy for us, because we really start to talk with SCPR before we launch Hello Merci. We nearly launched Hello Merci with the benediction of SCPR, because at the time it was easy. You don't have interest of Hello Merci, so it's quite simple. So once again, on this item, as non-financial professionals, for us, quite easy, because we're out of threats. And at that time, when we start, I mean, we did create Hello Merci at that time because we had already Lend the Police on mind. And then for us, it was a trial shot. And then we're sure that we can use the techno that we had on Hello Merci to launch Lend the Police. And then at that time, start all the discussions with all the guys you have here, Nicolas and the associations. And in France, and little by little, we moved what everybody thought impossible at that time, which was the banking monopoly. So it means that all those environments, anyway, until now, make things quite difficult to understand for everybody, especially for the audience, because we're talking about regulation to make sure that we are protecting this kind of investor compared to another one. But at the end of the day, the only country where the figures are really, really high, it's the UK or America, because, I mean, the quadrature of these regulations are quite simple to understand for people. In France, look at what happened this morning. For the lenders, this morning they understood that the old schema, which was EFP, doesn't mean anything anymore, because now you have those bond cases, those mini bond that you can use if you're a CIP without minimum. So I mean, you've got two status for the same thing, which the new one, which is killing the other one. So I mean, how do you want to make our work, which is mainly to start with, to make some pedagogy out of the audience, to make sure that being transparent and trustful, that people can understand. As long as we are creating some status of that kind, which are eating each other's, with another strat, the European one, which is changing again the rules, I mean, it's just creating a nightmare. And at the end of the day, what's going to happen is that the American and the English are going really, 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 really fast, when the French or German are going really, really, really slowly. And in 10 years from now, if we don't change things, then the market will be only a UK market, because all the huge platforms, they will buy everything. So I mean, there is a critical point right now in Europe, and we need to move fast to make sure that our platform can work with a safe environment. In one end with this regulation, and the other one with the fiscal and the taxation system too, which is another nightmare. So I mean, I just give a warning right now, which is a real warning. I mean, we are really, really, really late if we don't move. 10 years from now, the market will be 100% coming from UK and America. That's it.
Oliver, do you agree that the success of the UK market, which is more than 10 times larger than the French market, with over 3 billion pounds raised in 2015, for example, would you agree that part of the success of the UK market is due to the laxer regulation and to the more forward-looking attitude of the Financial Conduct Authority?
We still have Brexit, so Britain might be soon out of the race. But in general, I think the British, of course, have a different attitude towards financial services than the Germans, the Austrians, even worse than the Germans, or the French. So that certainly plays a role in accepting new financial service offerings. But it goes way beyond this. It is, of course, we have to look at tax incentive schemes that exist in the UK for equity investments that are applicable to crowdfunding and that are being used widely. And so a large influx of the capital that went into the space was also, using these tax incentives. If you would have the same in France or in Germany, where you get penalized if you invest, you probably would have higher rates of investment as well. We also have to see that
if I may clarify for the audience, 95%, more than 95% of the equity raised in crowdfunding in the UK is raised under the EIS tax exemption, which exempts absolutely every capital gain that you could make. Is free of tax. And when you invest, 30% is directly deductible from your taxes. So it's a combination of amazing tax breaks.
So I mean, this plays a role. It plays a role that the British government was very early, very outspoken and positive about crowdfunding, even co-investing publicly. So these are all, things that help a lot. Then I think we have to be very careful when we look at figures, especially when they come from the UK. Then on the equity side, we have one large platform that's called Crowdcube with more than £100 million. And then the next players are much smaller. And I'm not sure if this difference in size is that significant between French players and UK players on that second tier. I think there's a lot of alignment. So we can argue there's one platform that is scaling rapidly. And the real big figures in the UK come, and I don't want to even start about this defining crowdfunding, but they come from what is called peer-to-peer lending, and they have something like 60, 70 platforms, there even more, but 7 or 8 platforms are 80% of the market. Some of these platforms only manage institutional money, so hedge funds. We can ask, is this actually comparable or not? And if we would take out this top line of investment on that level, maybe the markets are not that different, then we see it very different. But right now, we unfortunately don't have relevant figures on the market. And that makes it really, really difficult to compare France with Germany, with Finland, with Netherlands.
Yeah, but whether there are crowdfunding platforms or not, it might be the case that tomorrow they will be the only platforms left in Europe because they have the potential to acquire every single platform in Europe. The distance between them and other platforms, there is a form of legal and regulatory and fiscal competition at work here, isn't there? I mean, what is your opinion, Vincent?
Things that what we call the regulation, let's say, to make it simple for the audience, which is not really educated for that, it's the rules you have to play with to be in the game. So you've got some rules and you need to know them, and you need to make sure you respect them, that the game can be treated in a good way. The other way around, for the people who want to come on those platforms, the only word that matters, it's taxation. I mean, as long as you live on Kiss Kiss Bang Bang rules, which are based on empathy and solidarity, of course, the world is different. Mm-hmm. But when we are talking about the huge market, which is lending market or equity market, that we don't talk about empathy anymore. I mean, we're talking about investment. Mm-hmm. And those investments are pursued by the public, but the same way that what we can see on the others. So as long as you've got such differences between UK and France, I mean, it's quite easy to explain where the market is really, really faster in England. If we come back on the figures, if you're talking about funding circle, for example, I mean, you've got, they raised more £1 billion with 75-80% of the crowd and 20% for the state or institutional. So it means that for this first billion, which are really, really far away in France, I mean, we talk with the 4 or 5 leaders in France, we're only, I don't even know, like maybe 100 million, which is, and then you've got 2 different kind of rules. You've got your rules for the players themselves, and you've got the rules, which is taxations for the contributors, which are investors or lenders. And as long as we don't have something really solid, convenient for everybody in Europe, I mean, you can fight, simple as that.
Mm-hmm. There's also, I mean, when we talk about harmonization of crowdfunding platforms, we talked about MiFID. There's no harmonization of tax rules. So, even if you have a passport, you will still have not tax harmonization. We haven't talked about the prospectus directive, which actually regulates the issuers, so the company that raises money, not the crowdfunding platform. So there's multiple sets of regulations and rules and legislation that, you know, you have to pay a lawyer. You know, there's good lawyers here in the room that can explain it to you, at least for your country. I'm not naming them, all here.
Everybody knows him.
Yes, but it's before we have a really open market. That's 50 years from now on. Yeah, so let's not wait for this.
Maybe not 50 years. I mean, Jennifer, you're working on the Capital Markets Union. From your experience in working as a regulator, you know, what is the normal path followed when? How many years of trouble can we expect?
I could write, I think, a doctoral thesis on trying to answer that question. I think it's unclear is the short answer, of course. And maybe just to be clear that here at ESMA, if you like, we have quite a limited range of things that we can look after. So if we go back to what Oliver was talking about, we can work on trying to make sure that our national authorities apply similar rules in a similar way to the platforms, but there's nothing that we can do about national tax regimes, for example. The next move really at the European level is in the ball is in the court of the European Commission, which, as you know, is due to publish its report on the state of the market soon, and then to say whether it thinks that there is more to be done at European level to support the evolution of this market. Now, I think here at ESMA, we were quite clear that there were some issues that we hope the Commission would choose to look at. The decision whether they do that is for the Commission clearly themselves. And from what they've said publicly, I think it's clear that they are minded to be cautious. And I think there are some reasons that even as a regulator I can see are prudent about being cautious, which is not to, it's worse to regulate badly a lot of the time than not to regulate at all. And I can see that the Commission is worried that you could regulate in a way which would actually just create more problems for businesses and make the problem worse. However, I think our concern is that if we don't try to grasp this nettle, as we would say in English, soon, we'll really just hamper the evolution, whether it's of that first tier that Oliver was describing, I think particularly for them, because they're also going to be competing internationally, not just within the EU. They're the potentially global players of the future, but also for that second tier. That second tier who, maybe here in France, you have the advantage of having a large domestic market, but you still also have francophone neighbours. It'd be quite nice to be able to
yeah, we
deal with those
we just
as well.
heard
We
from
heard from
Luke
that earlier,
and Finn.
exactly. We also have small member states in Europe. You know, we have Finnish platforms at the moment who are very energetic, very keen to expand, very keen to make use of the possibilities that they have across Europe. It's difficult for them to do that. And so we really have a concern, but I'm not sure that we can... I'm not sure we're going to be fixing these problems overnight, but we have to wait and see what the Commission decides to do next.
Oliver, what is your take? Talking about the example of Investor, Investor is a Finnish platform which prides itself in being regulated in the MiFID framework. But you told me the story behind this. Can you share it with the audience?
I'm not sure if it is that much of a story, but I mean, maybe shed some light on how good you have it here in France. So the Finnish regulator was fairly open in letting crowdfunding thrive. When in Finland, that means there were 3 or 4 platforms. Yeah, so it's not a huge market, and they were all very small. And the Ministry of Finance is very supportive of crowdfunding. They actually think this is something that could drive entrepreneurship and innovation and finance, access to finance for SMEs in Finland. There's a lot of startups since Nokia went out of business. And for some yet unknown reason, though, Jennifer might know them better, the regulator changed its opinion about 180 degrees, turned around completely, and demanded a full MiFID license from equity crowdfunding platforms if they wanted to operate overnight, which meant that there's no platform left that can do this, apart from this one platform that went the way to go for the full MiFID license, now has also approached more or less every market in Europe where they want to operate and approach the regulators with their license, telling them what they wanted to do. They have no issues doing this, but they still cannot actually operate pan-European because they won't have to, comply with prospectus directive to the issuers. They cannot have investors from across all over Europe invest in one country because some regulators make interpretations about certain rules applying also to their markets if people invest out of their markets. And it's for a small company like this, of course, incredibly difficult to fight opposition. Even though they might be right, they don't have the firepower, the cash, and the time to go this. So they are just closed their first, what they call fully regulated pan-European transaction. They should have probably had by now 20 in their own business plan. So it's very difficult to still convince people outside of, of their own nation, of their own regulated framework, to accept what they want to do.
Mm-hmm. So we have a few minutes left. I think everybody has understood that we're dealing with quite a complex issue that will not be solved tomorrow. Nevertheless, I would like to ask every member of the panel what his or her wishes would be. What would be the next thing that should happen in French or European regulation? Jennifer, what would be your wish or your recommendation?
When you dream about us, what do you dream about?
I think one thing I would ask particularly for this audience is come and talk to us if there are still these specific problems that you encounter, and you'll be unsurprised to hear that Oliver, of course, does that. But this is an open invitation. One of the things that we do as ESMA is we have a forum where we bring together all the regulators around Europe who are regulating crowdfunding platforms, investment-based crowdfunding, just to go back to Vincent's point, that's our particular area of responsibility. Sometimes under local rules, sometimes under the European rules, but we try to really get to the bottom of practical problems that are faced by individual platforms. So if you have an issue, a specific issue, please at least do let us know. We will see what we can do in terms of getting clarity. I'm aware that that is not a replacement for when you're just thinking it's going to cost me so much to work out what the rules are that I can't even invest the time. But please try us, and we will try and help. So I think that's the kind of request that I would make for the people in this room, is to at least let us know, and we'll see if we can help you clear away individual barriers.
Vincent?
Well, I think first we need to congratulate the team of the minister right here in this house, because they worked a lot. And as you said, Oliver, everything is done since the beginning with a lot of transparency and a lot of collective intelligence. So my first wish, although the government might change soon, that we keep the same atmosphere of work, of course. The second wish is, of course, what we talked about, taxation. With no changes, radically changes about taxation, I mean, the market will stay slow. That's for sure. And we need to work on that. And let's say that the basic rules right now are just right there, and we can operate reward-based lending and equity. So as long as the game can start, that let's make sure that the players can come in without restrictions and without getting the impressions that to take risk without reward behind. And that's a little bit what you hear today about our lenders. They understand, they believe that they can make sure that the economy system can be more efficient thanks to crowdlending, but are not really convinced right now that it will change their life money-wise. And we need to change that, because if we don't do it, then once again, I mean, the UK market will lead. I mean, for the American market, will lead the all-over market.
Oliver?
I think, I mean, you heard me earlier, I'm skeptical about regulation or policy making. I mean, it's a very long process, but I think it would be nice if policymakers, regulators start seeing regulation not only in addressing risk, but also opportunities, which is usually something that policymakers do much more than regulators. So it's an opportunity, and that the overall goal shouldn't be to create a crowdfunding market or whatever it is. I mean, even though this is what it's about, it should be about financing the economy, financing growth, creating jobs, and so on. And to do that, you have to, assume some risk. And so the third part then would be about the people involved. There is we talked about this earlier on, financial literacy. I mean, do people understand what they're doing? no, they don't, or the people that do it today, yes, but the people that will do it in 10 years, they probably don't understand it today. We need to educate people about how to use financial services, and that is not only crowdfunding, that is all financial services. And we should trust them to make, decisions on their investment. If they raise children, if they can buy a car for 100,000 euros or a house for 1 million, maybe they can also invest 10,000 euros on their own will. I think that is kind of the freedom we should allow them. And if we bring this all together, then maybe it works in a few years.
Thank you. I think we can all subscribe to that. Thank you very much to the panelists. Let's give them a big round of applause. This is the end of this panel.